He succeeds me as Duke of Cornwall and takes on the responsibilities. Today, I am proud to create him Prince of Wales.
The world is reeling after Buckingham Palace released a massive and heartbreaking announcement.
It was the day no mother should ever face, the day Princess Diana ordered a secret DNA test for her son, Prince Harry. Not to confirm her own faith, but to silence a whisper campaign that had grown into a royal war cry. It was 1995, and behind the gilded gates of Kensington Palace, a mother's love had turned into her last line of defense against a system determined to destroy her credibility and her child's legitimacy. For months, London tabloids had been ablaze with headlines too cruel to print twice. Red-haired Harry, the question the palace won't answer. The suggestion was clear, poisonous, and deliberate that Harry might not be the biological son of Prince Charles. The rumor wasn't born in a dark pub or gossip column. It was seeded and spread by palace-friendly media, sanctioned by courtiers, and quietly tolerated by Charles himself. At the center of this storm stood Diana, the woman the world adored but the institution despised. In the public eye, she was radiant, compassionate, and free-spirited. Behind closed doors, she was cornered, accused of infidelity, painted unstable, and forced to fight for the dignity of her son. Her supposed crime was emotional honesty. Her punishment, a smear campaign designed to strip her of moral authority before the divorce became official. The rumors had begun months earlier, after Charles's camp had realized that Diana still commanded public affection even as their marriage collapsed. To neutralize her, the courtiers began leaking stories about her fragile mind, her obsession with public sympathy, and then, most devastatingly, about Harry. "He looks nothing like his father," one royal correspondent sneered on national television. "That hair, that laugh, he's not a Windsor." Diana tried to ignore it, but the damage was swift and merciless. Schoolmates repeated the rumors to Harry's face. Strangers shouted it outside palace gates. Paparazzi taunted her with questions about James Hewitt, the cavalry officer she'd met 2 years after Harry's birth, but that fact never mattered to the tabloid. The story was too profitable and too politically convenient. Behind the curtain, another name began to surface: Camilla Parker Bowles, then officially just a friend of Charles, but in truth, the shadow queen in waiting. Sources later confirmed that Camilla's inner circle had quietly encouraged journalists to keep the Hewitt angle alive. The purpose was cruel but strategic. If Diana could be discredited as an unfaithful wife, Charles would appear the wronged husband, paving the way for his future marriage to Camilla. What the public didn't know was how deeply the accusations had wounded Harry. 11 years old at the time, he had begun asking his mother why people said he wasn't royal. Diana, desperate to protect him, tried reassurance, distraction, even humor. But when an anonymous letter arrived at the palace warning, "They know the truth. Get the test before they use it against you," she realized silence was no longer protection, it was surrender. Patrick Jeffson, her former private secretary, later described her mood as terrified but resolute. She knew she was walking into a trap. If she ordered the DNA test, palace officials could label her paranoid. If she refused, the rumors would thrive. The monarchy had engineered a perfect double-bind, one that only a mother's instinct could escape. Late one evening, Diana met her trusted physician, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, in Chelsea. There would be no royal doctors, no official labs, no traceable paper trail. The samples were sent to a private facility in Switzerland. Even there, the staff were instructed not to use names, only coded initials, Subject A and Subject B. 2 weeks later, the results arrived in a sealed envelope. Alone in her study, Diana opened it with trembling hands. The document was clinical, emotionless. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. Subject B is confirmed as the biological father of Subject A. Relief came first, then anger. She had never doubted Charles's paternity. What she wanted was proof, a shield, something to protect Harry from the lies that had been weaponized against him. But buried in the technical pages was something else, a line that would later ignite one of the greatest royal cover-ups of the century. The Swiss geneticist had noted an incidental finding, markers indicating a hereditary condition known as porphyria, the same rare metabolic disorder that had once afflicted King George III, whose mental instability changed the course of British history. The revelation explained everything: Harry's complexion, his sensitivity to sunlight, even his reddish hair, all traits connected to that genetic lineage. The truth was devastating in its irony. Harry looked different because he carried the same royal blood the palace was so desperate to preserve. When Diana confronted palace officials with the result, their reaction was not gratitude but fear. The royal physicians, led by Dr. Anthony Whitmore, admitted they had long known that porphyria ran in certain branches of the royal family. Their decision to let the Hewitt rumor persist, they argued, was to protect the privacy of the royal bloodline. In plain English, they would rather the world think Diana had been unfaithful than admit the Windsors carried a genetic flaw. This betrayal marked a breaking point in Diana's relationship with the monarchy. She realized that the institution would sacrifice anyone, even a child, to protect its mythology. "They'll let my son grow up doubting himself," she told a confidant, "so long as the image of perfection remains untouched." The secret test became her silent weapon. She stored the results in a sealed file with her lawyer, to be used only if the palace ever dared to challenge Harry's legitimacy again. But the emotional damage had already been done. William, at 13, had begun resenting the public chaos surrounding his family. Harry, at 11, internalized the mockery that he was different. It would be years before he could understand how calculated that cruelty had been. In that single decision, a mother choosing to test her son's blood, Diana had exposed the deepest hypocrisy of the British monarchy, that the truth mattered less than control, and love was a greater threat to power than any scandal. What began as an act of maternal protection would soon spiral into a confrontation that changed the royal family forever. The moment Princess Diana confirmed Prince Harry's paternity with DNA, she knew something would shift, not publicly, not immediately, but behind closed doors where the monarchy operated in whispers and threats. The truth had set her heart at ease. But for the institution, truth was dangerous. And now, the palace needed to contain it. Within days of receiving the test results, Diana's private line rang. On the other end was Sir Robert Fellows, the Queen's private secretary, and, more awkwardly, Diana's own brother-in-law. The message was unmistakable. "We know." Diana hadn't leaked the results. Her physician, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, hadn't spoken a word. But the palace had eyes everywhere. Someone had traced the lab in Switzerland. Someone had reported the genetic finding. The meeting was scheduled not at Buckingham Palace, too formal, too risky, but in a discreet government-owned office in Westminster. When Diana arrived, she found not only Fellows waiting, but Dr. Anthony Whitmore, the royal family's chief medical advisor. Without pretense, Dr. Whitmore confirmed the worst. "The condition discovered in the test porphyria is known to us. It has long been a concern in our family records. Its presence in Prince Harry confirms a genetic thread that must remain private." Diana's voice trembled with fury. You knew this, and still let people call my son illegitimate. You watched the press tear me apart. You let Harry suffer." Sir Robert remained calm. "What would you have us do? Admit that the royal bloodline carries the same genetic defect that once brought down a king? That the child second in line to the throne might inherit a condition associated with madness?" It was an admission, veiled, but real. The palace had chosen to let whispers of adultery grow unchecked, because the alternative was to acknowledge a medical truth too dangerous for public scrutiny. For centuries, the Windsors had survived by controlling the narrative. Diana, armed with facts and maternal rage, had just become their biggest liability. Then came the ultimatum. They 18. Do not release the DNA results to the public. Do not use them in divorce negotiations. Do not speak of porphyria or of the palace's knowledge of it. In exchange, the palace promised to silence the tabloid leaks, discourage the red-haired rumor mill, and ensure Harry would never be questioned publicly again. It was a devil's bargain. Diana saw it for what it was, a threat disguised as diplomacy. But her love for Harry overrode her fury. Revealing his genetic condition would open a new battlefield, one in which Harry would be scrutinized not for his paternity, but for his fitness. Would he go mad? Was he fit for royal duties? She couldn't do that to him. And so Diana agreed with conditions. The DNA results would remain sealed, but stored with her legal team. If the palace ever weaponized Harry's paternity again, she would release the test and the evidence that the palace had knowingly suppressed the truth. For the next several months, the media tone shifted. The most vicious rumors disappeared. Royal correspondents changed their tune. Whispers about Diana's instability were replaced with carefully orchestrated praise for Charles's restraint in the divorce. But inside the palace, the mood turned cold. Charles, reportedly humiliated by the necessity of a DNA test, grew more distant. William, ever observant, noticed the frost and began to internalize his own guilt, that he looked like a Windsor, that he wasn't mocked like Harry, and that somehow he must play peacekeeper between his warring parents. Harry, despite his mother's assurances, became more withdrawn. The playground taunts didn't vanish overnight. Years later in interviews he would allude to the pain of being called the spare, of hearing that he wasn't a real prince. He never mentioned Porphyria, he likely never knew, but the emotional bruise remained. Diana bore the cost in silence. The woman accused of hysteria had proven herself right, but she could never publicly claim victory. Her son's peace demanded her restraint. Still, her allies noticed something had changed. She no longer flinched when tabloids printed lies. She no longer begged palace officials for support. The DNA test had given her power, quiet, conditional, buried, but power nonetheless. And the palace knew it. As Princess Diana quietly sealed away the truth DNA results proving Harry's legitimacy and genetic findings exposing a royal medical secret, another force was beginning to stir within the palace. Camilla Parker Bowles. Though still unacknowledged officially, Camilla's presence was no longer a whisper in Charles's life. She was his constant companion, his emotional confidant, and increasingly, his strategic partner. To many within the royal circle, Camilla was more than the other woman. She was becoming the architect behind Charles's emotional detachment from Diana and arguably from his own children. The day Diana ordered the DNA test was the day Camilla knew she had to act. A maternal act of protection by the people's princess had unintentionally revealed something far more threatening than any scandal. Diana was still capable of controlling the narrative, and in a battle for public perception and future legitimacy, that made her dangerous. Camilla, working through a tightly knit group of friends and journalists, began reshaping the public tone around Charles's suffering. Stories emerged subtly casting Charles as a man humiliated not by his own coldness or infidelity but by a paranoid, media-hungry wife who had dared to question his son's bloodline. The hypocrisy was stunning, but the messaging worked. Conservative newspapers printed phrases like, "Diana's desperation and testing royal paternity, has she gone too far?" Behind closed doors, Camilla was reportedly furious that Diana's legal team now held power over the palace. She feared correctly that if Diana ever released the DNA results and the Porphyria findings, it would shatter Charles's credibility, not because of the adultery rumors, but because the crown itself would appear genetically unstable. Worse, it would demonstrate that Diana had been right all along about Harry, about Charles's emotional abandonment, and about the hypocrisy embedded in royal life. Charles, meanwhile, sank into passive complicity. He refused to confront the rumors publicly. He did not visit Diana to speak of the test. He did not reassure his sons. At a palace meeting days after Diana's agreement to silence, a senior aide reportedly asked Charles, "Shall we thank her for not releasing it?" Charles's response was muted. "It's done. Leave it alone." But it wasn't done not for William and Harry. William, then 13, had begun to understand the cold calculations behind royal life. He had watched his mother cry behind doors. He had overheard conversations between staff. And now, for the first time, he saw his father choose silence over truth. His relationship with Charles changed permanently after that. Where once he had been eager to please, William became guarded, loyal only to his mother, and increasingly critical of the environment Camilla represented. For Harry, the fallout was more personal. He felt different, and now he knew that difference had been questioned by the very institution meant to protect him. Diana, in her wisdom, never told him about the Porphyria, but Harry, sensitive and perceptive, could feel the tension. At school, boys mimicked headlines. At home, whispers followed him down corridors. He asked fewer questions. He stopped smiling in photographs. Diana noticed, and she blamed Charles. One evening, according to Diana's bodyguard at the time, she confronted Charles in a hallway at Kensington Palace. The words were icy. "You let them say he wasn't yours. You let Camilla's friends print it. You let them humiliate me. And now Harry walks with shame on his shoulders. You call yourself his father?" Charles didn't respond. Camilla, of course, benefited most from the emotional wreckage. With Diana's public image under attack, Charles increasingly leaned on Camilla for support. She comforted him with the illusion of righteousness. "You were the victim, not her. She questioned your child. She brought this on herself." That private framing allowed Charles to justify not defending Diana and, by extension, not defending his own son to preserve his own reputation. It was the final fracture in Diana and Charles's already broken marriage. The divorce, still under negotiation, now had a darker undertone, not just a personal separation, but an institutional betrayal. Diana began insisting on clauses protecting her children from specific press attacks. She demanded legal wording that shielded their names from being exploited by palace staff. Her legal team expanded their scope. She no longer trusted anyone inside the firm. Yet despite everything, Diana kept the secret. She didn't release the DNA test. She didn't expose Porphyria, because even in betrayal, her first instinct was protection, not revenge. But the emotional cost was rising. William, caught between duty and love, began to internalize the duality. He was the heir expected to stand beside Charles, attend functions, learn protocols, but in his heart, he sided with his mother. He saw the pain Harry carried and knew it could have been avoided. Harry, meanwhile, began to drift first emotionally, then physically. He retreated into quieter hobbies, leaned on his nannies and protection officers for stability, and grew skeptical of titles, uniforms, and the weight of Windsor expectations. The paternity smear, orchestrated in whispers and press leaks, had accomplished its true aim, not to prove anything, but to destabilize a child and isolate a mother. Camilla had avoided public confrontation. Charles had avoided responsibility, and the palace had avoided accountability. Diana, however, had not avoided the truth. She had faced it, documented it, and held it quietly in her hands, a sealed envelope that proved her son's legitimacy and the palace's cowardice. That envelope would remain locked away, but its existence would shape every move Diana made in the months to come and cast a long, burning shadow over the future of the monarchy. By early 1996, as the divorce negotiations between Princess Diana and Prince Charles escalated behind palace walls, Diana possessed something no one else in the entire royal institution had: leverage, not born of status or titles, but from truth. Tucked away in a secure cabinet within her lawyer's office was a sealed file containing irrefutable DNA results that proved Prince Charles was the biological father of Prince Harry, and the accompanying discovery of a rare hereditary condition, porphyria. On the surface, Diana appeared compliant. The public saw a mother focused on her sons, a princess retreating gracefully from royal duties, but in reality, she had begun outmaneuvering one of the most powerful institutions in the world. The sealed file became her silent shield, her last form of protection in a palace determined to erase her influence. Her solicitor, Anthony Reeves, had strict instructions. If they ever use Harry's name to weaken my legal position, if they even hint that he might not be Charles's son, you hand them that file. You take it to the press. You take it to court. You burn the narrative down. It wasn't revenge, it was strategy. Diana knew what she was up against. A monarchy with centuries of experience in self-preservation, now allied with Camilla's calculated manipulation and Charles's cold detachment. This was no longer about a marriage ending. It was about power, legacy, and control of the future, especially the future of her sons. Inside the sealed file were 3 key documents: the DNA analysis from the Swiss laboratory, listing Harry as the biological son of Prince Charles, with 99.9% certainty; the letter from Dr. Klaus Werner, the geneticist, explaining the incidental finding of porphyria markers in Harry's genome; a legal affidavit, signed by Dr. Sarah Mitchell, confirming that the test was ordered privately and independently, with no palace interference. Each paper was damning not to Diana, but to the palace that had knowingly allowed tabloids to assassinate her character and weaponize her child's image. By March 1996, palace lawyers made their move. In a tense negotiating session, one of Charles's senior legal advisors allegedly floated a disturbing suggestion: there remains some public uncertainty about the younger child. Certain conditions related to succession could be challenged if questions persist. It was subtle, carefully phrased, but unmistakable, a threat veiled as procedural concern. Reeves didn't flinch. He stood, pulled a red-sealed envelope from his briefcase, and laid it on the table. You mention his paternity again, and this becomes public record. You'll not only face a media firestorm, but the undeniable fact that the palace let these rumors circulate while sitting on the truth. Don't test her. The room fell silent. The envelope remained unopened, but its presence ended the conversation. That line of attack was never raised again. Yet Diana didn't stop there. With the file now protecting her legal flank, she began reclaiming space in her sons' lives on her terms. She petitioned for a change in the visitation schedule, citing Harry's emotional distress and William's growing anxiety around media appearances. She requested psychological counseling for both children, paid for privately. She began orchestrating quiet exits from joint engagements, insisting that Harry no longer attend events where photographers might bait him with cruel questions. And all the while, Camilla loomed, increasingly emboldened. No longer just the mistress, she was now the future. Charles began pushing for public acknowledgement of their relationship. Palace aides began introducing Camilla in private settings as a legitimate companion. Diana, disgusted, refused to acknowledge her presence during official transitions. She once told a confidant, "They want to erase me while my sons still call me Mummy. They forget I'm not the spare part, I'm the engine that still runs this family." Privately, the Queen remained aloof. Publicly neutral, she neither condemned nor defended Diana, but allowed the palace machine to protect Charles and accommodate Camilla. This institutional ambivalence only hardened Diana's resolve. She began consulting with media contacts, granting carefully timed interviews, never revealing the DNA test, but making pointed remarks about how truth always finds a way out. For William, the divorce became a daily lesson in royal silence. At age 14, he had already learned that truth was negotiable, that love was conditional, and that public image mattered more than private wound. His once simple understanding of monarchy had become a moral maze. A father he couldn't admire, a stepmother he couldn't respect, and a mother he couldn't protect. Harry, now 12, showed signs of rebellion. He acted out in class. He avoided public outings. Diana noticed he flinched every time someone commented on his red hair. He had never been told about the test or the disease, but he understood the pain of being called illegitimate. Diana responded with the only thing she could offer certainty. One evening, she sat beside Harry's bed and said, "You're mine, and you are your father's son. Never let the world tell you otherwise." He nodded, unsure, but she squeezed his hand tighter. In private letters to close friends, Diana confessed her fear that the palace would one day erase her legacy entirely. "They will try to make me small, but Harry and William will remember who fought for them. That is enough." By the summer of 1996, the divorce settlement was finalized. Diana was stripped of the title Her Royal Highness, but retained the title of Princess of Wales. She lost her place in the royal hierarchy, but she had secured something far greater: the safety of her sons and a locked cabinet containing the truth. The sealed file was never used again during Diana's lifetime, but it remained where she left it, quiet, powerful, and waiting. The ink had dried on the divorce papers, but the fallout was just beginning. For William and Harry, their parents' bitter split and the quiet war waged behind closed doors left scars far deeper than the tabloids could ever print. The sealed DNA file remained hidden, never released to the public, but its existence cast a long, invisible shadow over the lives of both boys. Though Diana had protected them from the worst of it, ensuring the test remained a secret, safeguarding Harry's medical privacy, and confronting every insinuation with silent strength, she couldn't protect them from the emotional inheritance left behind. They had watched their mother fight for their names, they had seen their father retreat into indifference, and they had felt the weight of a monarchy that saw them more as heirs than as children. William, ever the observer, buried his turmoil under composure. At 14, he began emulating his mother's emotional intelligence but internalized his pain. Friends and staff would later say he took on the role of protector, especially of Harry, shielding him from press questions, intervening when schoolmates mocked his appearance, and even avoiding topics about Camilla altogether. He never asked about the DNA test. Perhaps he didn't know, or perhaps he didn't want to know, but he understood the stakes. The moment you speak truth in the royal family, you become its enemy. Harry, meanwhile, grew up with questions no child should have to consider. Why do people say I don't belong? Why do they laugh at my hair? Why does Dad never say anything when it happens? Diana had given him the truth, verbally, emotionally, quietly, but her truth came at a cost. The louder she defended him, the more vicious the attacks. The more she shielded him, the more the press twisted her motives. When Diana died in August 1997, everything collapsed. William was 15, Harry only 12. The woman who had kept the lies at bay, who had held the palace to account without ever breaking her promise, was gone. And with her, the protective force that had kept the rumors from reigniting. In the days following her death, palace staff scrambled to regain control. Advisors debated whether to quietly retrieve Diana's personal legal files, including the sealed envelope, but her solicitor, Anthony Reeves, had anticipated this. The file had been moved days earlier to an independent legal trust. It would remain untouched, sealed, secure, and protected under Diana's name. Harry's grief after her death was volcanic. Unprocessed, unspoken and politicized by the media, his anger simmered for years. Though he never addressed the paternity rumors directly, he knew their origin, and he knew the palace had done nothing to stop them. In interviews years later, he would speak of being abandoned emotionally and treated like a problem to manage, not a person to love. William tried to hold the family together. He resumed royal duties, made public appearances, and defended the monarchy's image. But privately, he distrusted the institution more than ever. In letters found after Diana's death, William wrote to a close friend, "They'll never understand what it cost her to stay silent. I only hope we never forget who protected us when it mattered." As Camilla began to be seen more publicly alongside Charles, then accepted into the family officially, Harry and William responded differently. William maintained civility. He accepted the public narrative for the sake of duty, but refused to let Camilla ever replace the mother who had been silenced to make room for her. Harry, on the other hand, resisted entirely. His discomfort was visible, his tension palpable. He knew what the public didn't, that Camilla had benefited from, and perhaps encouraged the rumors that had nearly destroyed him. The sealed file remained unopened. Neither brother spoke of it, but its presence lingered, like a ghost tethered to every family photograph, every public wave, every silent look exchanged during official appearances. The truth had been protected, but the wound remained. For the world, the story of Diana, Charles, and Camilla was one of scandal and tabloid drama. But for William and Harry, it was a story of silence, sacrifice, and survival. A story where love was weaponized, truth was buried, and their mother stood alone, armed only with paper, blood, and love. Years passed. The monarchy endured, reinvented itself, and rebranded Camilla. She became Duchess of Cornwall, then quietly Queen Consort. Official history softened the past, rewriting Charles as a man misunderstood and Camilla as his long-suffering soulmate. But beneath the polished surface, one truth remained untouched because it had been protected not by the crown, but by Diana. The sealed DNA file stayed where she left it, locked away in legal trust, witnessed and archived. It was never leaked, never weaponized, and yet its very existence changed the course of royal history. Diana had created a line no one dared cross again. After that envelope landed on the negotiating table in 1996, no palace aide, no lawyer, no royal biographer ever publicly questioned Harry's paternity again. Even after Diana's death, that silence held, not out of respect but out of fear. Internally, palace officials knew the damage it could unleash. Not only did it confirm Charles's paternity of Harry, rendering every smear campaign a lie, but it exposed their willingness to let a child suffer under accusations they knew were false, just to shield the perception of royal perfection. It confirmed that their silence had never been neutral. It had been strategic cruelty. William never spoke of the file, but he honored its legacy. His loyalty to his mother became unshakable. As he matured, so did his resolve to modernize the monarchy in a way Diana would have approved of, less rigid, more empathetic, more protective of the next generation. His distance from Camilla, though always polite, remained clear. A quiet rebellion in honor of the woman who'd fought for him. Harry, in time, did speak. In interviews, memoirs, and global stages, he described being the spare, a term that once served as a joke but had, in truth, carried the weight of his entire childhood. He didn't reveal the DNA test. He didn't need to. What he revealed instead was the emotional cost of growing up in a system that gaslit, erased, and abandoned the vulnerable. He defended his wife, his children, and most of all, his mother's memory. Every time someone questioned his place in the royal family, he stood taller. Because Diana had already answered that question long before the world ever asked. In the end, Diana didn't win a public war. She didn't take down the monarchy. But she did something far greater. She preserved her son's truth. And in doing so, she created a legacy that outlasted the rumors, the headlines, and even her own life. The sealed file may never be opened, but it doesn't need to be, because its purpose was never revenge. It was love. And love, as Diana proved, survives everything, even silence, even the crown.